Hi, I'm Yuvraj, and I'm going to be talking about the historical origins of the criminal justice system. The roots of racial injustice in the criminal justice system can be traced back to the era of slavery. Black people who were enslaved suffered horrendous abuse and exploitation, and the legal system frequently supported or even participated in their tyranny. Strict control over the population of enslaved people was imposed by slave codes and subsequently black codes. Penalties were administered without following the proper legal procedures. The systemic bias that would last for millennia was established during this early era. Next is the Jim Crow laws. Following the abolishment of slavery, Black Americans hoped for a new era of freedom and equality. However, the reality was far from it. The rise of Jim Crow laws replaced overt slavery with immense segregation, and the criminal justice system became a tool for enforcing racial hierarchy. Black individuals were routinely arrested and convicted on outrageous charges, denied fair trials, and subjected to violence and intimidation. The legal framework continued to promote injustice despite advances in the civil rights movement. Black individuals faced disproportionate punishment for alleged crimes, while white perpetrators of violence against black people often escaped justice. The legacy of this era continues to haunt the American justice system, as the wounds of the past remain unhealed. The two pictures on the left are an example of the Jim Crow laws, as it shows the segregation as colored people and white people had different areas to drink for and different waiting rooms and different bathrooms. The Civil Rights Movement. The Civil Rights Movement brought about significant legal changes aimed at dismantling segregation and upholding the rights of Black Americans. Systemic racism persisted within the criminal justice system, manifesting in policies such as the war on drugs. This punitive approach disproportionately targeted Black communities, leading to mass incarceration and perpetuating cycles of poverty. Racial profiling, biased policing practices, and disparities in sentencing further contribute to the overrepresentation of Black individuals in the criminal justice system. And this picture here shows protesters kind of fighting for equality. How it relates to today. Black communities have been heavily impacted by systemic racism and injustice, according to a troubling trend of systemic racism. Black Americans have faced prejudice at every stage of the legal system since the end of slavery, which has had terrible effects on both individualism and social groups. Reforms that are comprehensive in nature, confronting the history of racial injustice, and advancing equality and justice for all, are necessary to address these ingrained problems. And this picture kind of shows the BLM movement and how people are still trying to protest and end racism, as it's still very prevalent. Even though the civil acts movement helped a lot with that, it's still a big problem, and it's good to see that people are still trying to fight to end racism.
Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm going to be focusing on which specific groups were impacted by our problems with the criminal justice system, and more importantly, how they are affected. So, to start, the group that is affected the most by the problems with our legal system is by far African Americans. This is because they have historically been the most targeted community and overall experienced the worst of these problems. A famous example of criminal injustice towards African Americans is Operation Hammer, which took place from 1987 to 1990 in Los Angeles. The mayor at the time, in response to increased gang violence, came up with a zero tolerance policy in which he allowed the LAPD to arrest anybody suspected of gang affiliations without any necessary proof. This resulted in over 20,000 African Americans being arrested over that 3 year period, and it caught controversy when it was revealed that many people were arrested without any gang affiliations whatsoever. Now, moving on to a more recent example, is the stop and frisk policies that took place in New York City when Mike Bloomberg was the mayor. So, Mike Bloomberg pretty much instructed the NYPD to stop and frisk anyone who was deemed suspicious without any warrant. This practice went on for about 10 years before it was exposed for being racist, because it was revealed that Mike Bloomberg instructed the police to camp outside predominantly black neighborhoods in order to increase the arrest rates of black people to make it look like they commit the most crimes. Now, moving on, let's move on to the longer term consequences, and more specifically, how this problem affects the youth. An example of how it has affected the youth is the prominence of the school to prison pipeline, which is the idea that kids of lower socioeconomic class are being set up to drop out of school and participate in criminal activity at a young age, which leads them into entering the prison system at a very young age and for a very long time. Once they are inducted into the legal system, they are either locked up for long prison sentences or immediately thrown back into society without any training on how to find jobs or reintegrate, which leads them back into the cycle of prison out, prison out. Overall, this contributes to a lot of distrust in the legal system that we see today. And more recently, we have seen a very big rise in protests over police brutality, and people are calling for a complete reformation of the entire criminal justice system in order to find justice for these people who they feel have been mistreated for.
Identify the role that the media plays in portraying criminal justice. Shaping public perception. Media coverage can shape public perceptions of crime, criminals, and law enforcement and the justice system. The way crimes are reported, the language used, and the framing of stories can influence how people perceive the effectiveness and fairness of the criminal justice system. An example of this would be the coverage of high-profile criminal case like the O.J. Simpson trial in the 1990s heavily influenced the public perceptions of the justice system. The extensive media coverage, including televised court proceedings, shaped public opinions about the fairness and effectiveness of the legal process. Setting the agenda. Media coverage can set the agenda for public discourse on crime and justice issues. When certain crimes receive extensive coverage, they may dominate public attention and influence policy debates and public opinion. Creating stereotypes. Media representations of criminals and crime often perpetuate stereotypes based on race, ethnicity, gender, and socioeconomic status. This can lead to the stigmatization of certain groups and impact how they are treated within the criminal justice system. An example of this would be a disproportionate portrayal of African Americans as criminals in news coverage and entertainment media contributes to racial stereotypes. For instance, the overrepresentation of black individuals as perpetrators of violent crimes perpetuates harmful stereotypes and fuels biases within the criminal justice system. Influencing policy. Media coverage can influence policymakers and decisions regarding the criminal justice policies and legislation. High profile cases covered extensively by the media may prompt calls for tougher laws or changes in existing policies. Providing oversight. The media serves as a watchdog, scrutinizing the actions of law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, and the judiciary. Investigative journalism can uncover the instances of misconduct, corruption, or injustice within the criminal justice system, leading to accountability and reforms. Entertainment versus reality. Fictional portrayals of crime and justice in movies, TV shows, and literature often diverge from reality. While they may entertain audiences, they can also shape perceptions and misconceptions about how the criminal justice system operates. Promoting dialogue. Media coverage of criminal justice issues can foster public dialogue and awareness about systemic problems such as racial disparities, wrongful convictions, and the treatment of prisoners. This dialogue can lead to advocacy for reform and increased transparency. An example of that would be the documentary series Making a Murderer. Sparked widespread debate and public outrage over the case of Stephen Avery, who was convicted of murder he claims he did not commit. The series shed light on issues such as wrongful convictions, police misconduct, and the flaws in the criminal justice system, promoting discussions about the need for reform and fair treatment of defendants.
What are the challenges for re-entry into society? First of all, there's limited access to housing, jobs, and education for post-convicts. This is often caused because most homeowners don't want to lease to convicts because they are seen as potential threats. The same could be said for many job hirers discriminating against convicts. They might think that convicts aren't capable of self-control and might lash out. Also, Housing discrimination traps black families in poverty and instability. Because African Americans make up a large amount of individuals in poverty, and poverty often leads to crime. This can mean that convicts trying to start a family can't get stable housing. Because they can't get stable housing, this leads to the endless cycle of poverty, crime, and conviction. Next, there's a lack of support for rehab and support programs. This There are many challenges for re-entry into society, so this emphasizes the critical importance of having thorough support services for people re-entering society after incarceration. Next slide. Okay. The tougher penalties often hit black people the hardest, keeping inequality alive. Many of these penalties or rules were often made by white officials. The policies are maybe not meant to be discriminatory, but are often discriminatory against black people because they make up the majority of the people doing crimes. Next, losing the right to vote silences black voices in democracy. Also, losing the right to vote makes it so black voices cannot participate in a court jury. This can make it so racial racial discrimination cases can be unfair with an all-white jury because oftentimes the all-white jury doesn't have any true insight on what it means to be black or a minority in the United States. Lastly, job discrimination keeps black individuals stuck in cycles of unemployment and poverty. Because these black individuals that did crimes are often poor, which is the main reason why they did the crime, they are now trying to fix their lives and get a job. But because they were convicts, now it's a real struggle for them to be able to apply and actually receive that job.
Hi, my name is Alex Nguyen, and I'll be discussing the question regarding what recommendations do we have for solving the social problem of criminal justice. So, as my groupmates have discussed in the previous slides, we've talked about social inequality regarding the criminal justice system, mostly against African Americans and other minorities, and just the issue with the system in general. In these slides, I'll be discussing several ideas that could contribute to helping with, or maybe just even outright solving the social problem altogether. So, the first thing I want to talk about is sentencing laws. So, as we've talked about, a lot of the systematic oppression is against African Americans and minorities. Thousands of youth are being sentenced to life in prison with little or no chance of ever being released. And this is a terrible thing because one, it destroys their chances at rehabilitation, which doesn't allow them to change themselves for the better after their crime. It doesn't allow them to unify again with their family and loved ones. And it just doesn't allow them to integrate themselves back into society after they serve their time. So, but people have been trying to help towards this issue. So, since 2016, the ACLU campaign for Smart Justice uh, have been working towards reforming the unjust sentencing system. And they've been victorious in Delaware, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Massachusetts, Mississippi, and Utah. And currently, they're working towards extending this outreach to all 50 states. So what they've done is they've eliminated mandatory minimums. So let's say a person commits a crime, um, the sentencing won't will be it'll be different for each crime, and it'll depend on like all of the different things that were into each situation, rather than just throwing a set number of years already onto the crime. Um, they've raised the felony thresholds on some offenses, And finally, they've reduced sentencing enhancements for repeat offenses. So let's say a person did a crime multiple times, or they did different like crimes throughout different times. It won't have an effect on their sentencing, um, which takes away like the bias towards the people and whatnot, and just it makes the sentencing more um, even and fair for everyone. And the next thing I want to talk about is alternatives for incarceration. So, as I've discussed briefly in the last slide, the main focus should be on rehabilitation for the offenders and helping them change for the better. It should be towards helping them learn from their mistakes. And a lot of people who commit crimes might be suffering from mental or physical issues in their lives, which there needs to be help applied where that's needed. And all in all, like they just need to be helped, changed, and put in back into society a better person, learning from their mistakes. So two of the most common programs that we have going on in America is home detention programs, which allow sentences to be served in specific residential locations like their home or other residential areas. This helps them uh, serve their time and change themselves, but maybe not in an environment like jail where it's just like a punishment and they don't really get much change out of it or anything to better themselves. And of course, there's limits, like it requires the participants to be monitored with GPS devices and stuff, but I think this will help a lot. And another thing is work release programs, which allows the offenders, um, to be allowed to spend their sentence on community service projects like picking up roadside trash and repairing public buildings. This allows them to be put to use, help the community, change themselves for the better, and it's just kills two birds with one stone. It helps them better themselves as well as helps the community. And this helps. All of this helps because we need to take the right measures for specific crimes. Like there shouldn't be just like sentences and like time spent for every crime. It should be depending on what the issue was and what's going on in their lives, and help needs to be put in different places for certain crimes, and that would help a lot with the offenders changing for the better and reintegrating themselves back into society. Thank you.